Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler-Miller.
Jewish young people in America and elsewhere are facing growing anti-Semitism in schools. Today, we discuss a program in which parents can develop skills to advocate for their children in such situations. Jason Holtzman is the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia and previously held positions at Hillel International. Andrew Goretsky is the regional director of ADL, Anti-Defamation League, Philadelphia, and previously served as Dean of Students at Arcadia University. Gentlemen, welcome to our show. We're eager to discuss with you how parents can advocate for their children in cases of anti-Semitism in school. Jason.
For having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Jason, what was the impetus for creating a 3-part online training program for parents?
Well, as I said, and as Andrew said, thank you for having us today. I think it's a really important time for us to be having this discussion with anti-Semitism and all forms of hate continuing to rise in our society. We chose to create this series because last academic year, we saw a major increase of anti-Semitic incidents happening inside of middle schools and high schools in the greater Philadelphia area. Talking incidents ranging from bullying and name calling to students reading lists out loud containing all the names of the Jewish students in schools, and unfortunately, even some physical assaults. Many of those types of incidents were reported to both of our desks at JCRC and at the ADL, and many of the parents or guardians who were reporting those incidents were disturbed by what was happening to their kids, and quite frankly, they didn't know what to do in those situations. So because of that, we chose to put on the calendar a 3-part series about anti-Semitism inside of schools and to offer best practices to community members that they could employ when advocating for their kids. And before we go deeper into it, I just want to say, obviously, there is no cookie cutter solution to any of these anti-Semitic incidents. Number one, because parents are often looking for different solutions to a situation that's occurred or is occurring. And quite often there's also different relationships that exist in specific institutions. So I think all of the incidents that we see require a customized approach. You can't just come in with the same thing every time. But there are some key steps, I think, that parents should always take. So we wanted to share some of those best practices and really just be able to help the people in our community who are dealing with the rise of hate that their kids might be experiencing inside of schools.
I'm happy to hear that parents can find support in how to face the situations where their kids may meet anti-Semitism in school. I understand that the way you explain it, I understand that it's a custom-made advice you give to every parent. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Because, some of the relationships are different, the incidents are different. I think there's definitely a difference between a physical assault and someone calling a name. They both require a response, but it's a different sort of response. And the one other aspect that I didn't mention is it depends how the institution is dealing with it themselves. Mm-hmm. So if an institution is proactively taking action and disciplining students and doing things that are satisfying the parents, that's a good thing. But if the institution is sitting on their hands and not doing anything, then I think that requires a much different type of approach. And there's also a middle of the road where an institution may do something, but it may not be enough for the parents. And so we do help them, do advocacy for their kids, raise awareness in the community for what's going on. And we look to get the response that they're looking for.
I also want to just add here, as we were planning to do this program and Jason and I came together to do this, obviously we have been hearing concerns from parents in the community, not certain how to approach these things. We also, when ADL put out its audit of anti-Semitic incidents last March, we saw a significant increase in K through 12 as well as colleges for anti-Semitic incidents on campus. So being able to provide a program like this, where the first session was really talking about overarching, what does anti-Semitism look like today? What's the data? What are we seeing? The second session, which we had last night, which was really a words to action program that ADL does, which is helping students as well as their parents be able to articulate when anti-Semitism occurs and how to be able to share that story and tell that story effectively. And then we have a third session coming up, which is sort of a real talk with, not sort of, it's a real talk with administrators and parents. So we have a panel discussion with a superintendent and talking about what they work with. We have a parent who has agreed to be on that panel, who was dealing with an anti-Semitic incident with their own child. And then I will be on there. As mentioned, I was previously a dean of students at Arcadia, and I worked 23 years in higher education, talking about it from a college administrative end, so that people can get that sense of what is it that the schools are looking for in those situations, so that they can be more effective when they're working with them.
Great. I think it's great.
Let's switch a little bit to Jewish identities, to kids feeling good. Andrew and I were talking before this started about students feeling proud about being Jewish or not wanting to reveal they're being Jewish. So, Andrew, why don't you tell us what you're doing to help parents teach their kids about Jewish identity?
Yep. So, I mean, this program in particular, in the 3 sessions that we've co-sponsored with the JCRC, has been really focused on anti-Semitism itself and how to portray that. Now, as far as focusing on positive aspects of Jewish identity and being able to open and sharing that component of it, it's actually one of the biggest pushes we're doing is asking for schools and administrations to include Jewish culture and anti-Semitism in their diversity, equity, and inclusion work. For a variety of reasons, it's been left out, especially in the last few years. I can speak to that definitively, having worked in higher education and seen the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses. And so it just really becomes important that we are celebrating the many beautiful aspects of being Jewish and encouraging students to be able to share who they are and what they're about, and getting the support from a school administration to be able to do that. And so wherever parents can provide their students support in that, we want to provide support there as well. But this 3 sessions was really about how do you work with administration to proactively address these types of things, and then how do you work to reactively respond when something does occur.
Jason, what is taught to help students be equipped with constructive and effective responses to combat anti-Semitism in their lives?
So I think equipping students with those type of effective and constructive responses, it involves a lot of different components that the schools can be teaching and can be encouraging their students to learn. Number one, I think it's an education on anti-Semitism, understanding the long history of anti-Semitism, its various forms, from traditional stereotypes to anti-Semitism that we're seeing today, which is often functioning in conspiracy theories, blaming Jews for whatever the issue of the day is. You know, we've seen Jews blamed for COVID, we've seen Jews blamed for the weather, Jews running the banks, running Hollywood. There's a lot of different things, and I think people need to understand what it looks like and what it has looked like. I think the diversity of the Jewish community is something that's very important to be teaching kids in America, especially. Many Jews, I think all of us on this call are Ashkenazi Jews, and so Jews come from, Jews who have come from Eastern Europe who are Ashkenazi, but that is not the entire story of the Jewish people. There are Jews of all colors. There are Jews from Africa, from different parts of the Middle East, all over the world. And so I think that that's really important, is to explain the diversity in the Jewish community, help people understand the differences between different Jews, different ethnic, different cultures, because Jews do not always look quote unquote white. I think, as Andrew was just saying in the previous question, it's really important for the Jewish community to be included in conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's part of it, is helping people understand that Jews are a minority, and that we suffer from a lot of the same hate that other minority groups in America are suffering from. And then I think it's generally, teaching kids critical thinking skills to help them understand what anti-Semitism looks like, what conspiracy theories look like that involve anti-Semitism, and to help them question whatever type of sources that they're encountering, whether it's in the classroom or it's in social media, or if it's in the hallway of the school with kids, talking to each other and spreading all sorts of nasty things. I think it's also important that students are aware of how to report incidents of anti-Semitism and equipping them with skills to be able to have a conversation, to be able to report something, to speak articulately about how an incident that they might experience is impacting them. And of course, I think, Holocaust education is crucial. I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor. My grandfather was liberated at Auschwitz, and my grandmother spent years of the war in hiding in a barn attic with members of her family. So it's very personal to me, but not everybody has that experience. And unfortunately, the Holocaust was the most documented genocide of world history. And so there are many lessons that can be learned from it, not just what happened there, but how it ever got to that point in the first place, and how, the Nazis actually studied Jim Crow law to craft the Nuremberg laws. And things like that are really important to teach our youth, really important to help especially the non-Jewish community understand, because it's not just Jews who are impacted by the Holocaust. It involved many others as well. So I think that's just a start. There's several other things that need to be taught, but I think that is a good starter.
Now, Jason, the criticism that Jewish students often get these days is that they feel sympathetic towards the state of Israel, towards Zionism, that Zionism actually is a part of their Jewish identity. Does your program deal with that?
Yes, it does deal with that. Zionism is definitely part of what we talk about, part of what we have talked about. It is, as you said, one of the more contemporary ways that students are experiencing anti-Semitism today is through attacking people for their support for Israel and trying to attack Zionism as racism, when Zionism is nothing like racism. It's a liberation movement. It's the return of Jews to our ancestral homeland, to the state of Israel. And there's a lot to unpack with the history of Israel and the history of Zionism, but it is not appropriate to blame all Jewish people for any sort of policies that are taking place in Israel, any sort of actions that are taking place in Israel. Most American Jews do not have a chance to vote in Israel. Most American Jews are not dual citizens of Israel. And even, as a Zionist and a supporter of Israel, I may not support all of Israel's policies. So I can't be held responsible for them because I don't support them, and I don't vote there. And it's the same thing for students today. So it's definitely part of what we're talking about.
If I can also add here, one of the pieces in relation to this component, we can be, and it's our right to be critical of the US government as American citizens,
Yes.
or critical of another government. So if you want to be critical of Israeli policies, absolutely. But the challenge is, and the problem is when that crosses into anti-Semitism. So if you're using traditional anti-Semitic tropes in order to talk about this, that's anti-Semitic. We had a student in a college setting she identified, and this is her own story. She said, I'm a progressive student. I believe in anti-racism. I believe in climate change. I believe in many progressive values. And when somebody found out that she was Jewish at one of these organizations, they said, oh, you must be a supporter of Israel. Therefore, you're a genocide supporter. You can't be here. That's anti-Semitic. When you are excluding somebody because of the fact that they have an affiliation and an affinity for a country. And she said, I disagree with many of the policies of Israel, but I support its rights to exist. And if you start talking about the destruction of the Jewish Israeli democratic state, that's anti-Semitic.
And just to add to that, we're seeing this more and more often, unfortunately. There was a campus here like a year and a half ago where there were posters put up all over campus. You can't be a Zionist and an anti-racist. You can't be a Zionist and a feminist. You can't be a Zionist and an environmentalist. And those posters stayed up on the campus for multiple weeks and no one took them down. No one even knew how the students were sanctioned to put posters up in that public space. And once again, Andrew and I had to come together and hold some meetings with the university administration there. And they put some policies in place to make sure that things like that wouldn't occur again. But those type of instances are happening more and more, where Jews are being attacked for their support of Israel.
And we will vehemently defend somebody's right to free speech, but that doesn't stop anybody, including an administration, whether it's the superintendent of a K through 12 school, administration of a higher education, to use their own speech against hate speech. We believe in combating negative speech with more positive speech.
Andrew, let's go back to what the program, this three-part program, is teaching parents what to do when anti-Semitic incidents take place in the school, where their children go to school, especially when that school does nothing.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things here that are important to note when talking about this question, and we're going to address this a lot in the third session that's coming up. The first piece is, especially in K through 12, but especially in college, in my experience working in higher ed and with schools, we know that when children are harassed, and people too, when they are harassed, oftentimes the last thing they want to do is bring more attention to it. So that's often the reason that there's a reticence to report, reticence to talk about it. So one, we have to break down the barriers to reporting and talking about it. And we have to help remove the fear, or help to manage the fear that comes from reporting it. And so we strongly encourage people to report. And we often say at ADL, if you do report it to us, we are going to do our best to maintain your privacy, and have done that most of the time, and usually will only connect once we've gotten the person. So one, we need people to report it. Reason for that is that a lot of times people may not report first or second incidences, and then they report it when it's become an even bigger issue, third, fourth, or fifth time. And it's the first time the school is hearing about it. And they are in challenge with how they can respond, because it may be the fifth time that this has happened, but it's the first time the school's heard about it. So their ability to respond may not be satisfactory because it's been going on for some time. So reporting the behavior, letting people know about the behavior, knowing that there's an educational process that often occurs the first couple of times, and doing that. And then the other piece is, if not comfortable reporting it to the school, report it to us at ADL, because I've had the situation where I've gotten 12 different reports from a specific school district, but the school district's only received 2 reports. So what it enables me to do is to go into that school and have my staff go to that superintendent or that principal and say, I know you've only gotten 1 or 2 reports, but we've gotten 12. And these people are scared to come forward. So we have to talk about how you put your policies out. So we want to encourage people to do that, gather the information, and work with us or work with anybody else to be able to go in and talk to the administration about it, because it may be perceived that they're not doing anything, but it may just be the first time that they've heard it as well. Now, if they are continuing to not take satisfactory response, this is where you need to then come in with support from either your local federation, your local ADL regional office. We have 25 regional offices across the country. And we can often work with you or advise you on how to engage those individuals. And remember that especially in K through 12, but colleges as well, they do have strict confidentiality requirements. So understanding that, knowing that, with an expectation of what a response can be is there. And this is where also encouraging administration to then call the incident what it is. When you generalize, a faith-based incident occurred, but you don't call it what it is, it then has that community feel unheard. So when you generalize it as an administration, and I'll own the fact that as an administrator early in my career, I probably did that a couple of times and had to learn that wasn't effective. And so encouraging administrators to really call it what it is. If it's a racist incident, talk about why it's racist and what's happened. If it's an anti-Semitic incident, talk about the fact that it's an anti-Semitic, but then talk with the community about why. So what's the educational piece about understanding why? When, students, when we saw an uptick in K through 12 following Kanye West's tweets that were going on, where students were going to their Jewish peers in school and saying Kanye was right, the thing to remember, Kanye has 30 million followers. There's only 15 million Jewish people in the world, and about half of that living in the United States. So the odds of so many of those individuals having minimal interaction with Jewish people is high likelihood. And so being able to come in and share that background and teach the community why this is a problem is important, and encouraging the schools to do that too.
And can parents and students who prefer to report to the ADL instead of to the school, can they stay anonymous if they want to?
So we have gone and we have shared aggregate data. So, I can speak for my own region here when somebody's reported it, and they've come and they've not wanted to know. I think we have to look at the specific situation with relation to that. If you're in a school district where you're one of 2 to 3 Jewish students coming forward, in all likelihood, they're going to know who the person is that came forward. And so we want to be careful about that. And so we're going to work hand in hand with the person who comes forward with the complaint and with the concern about how we approach, where we approach, because number one concern for me is the safety and security of that individual student. Along with that is then to work with the community to try to address the behavior from an educational end. And I want to encourage the students to continue to report incidences when they happen. And if all of a sudden they report it and it's getting more attention, that can sometimes chill their desire to report things. So we want to be careful about that, but we're going to look at each individual situation. In our regional offices across the country, we have people who specifically do incident intervention and incident work. And we'll talk where we can sometimes do it from an anonymous end. Like, as I said, I had one school district in particular that had a number of incidents. I think it was about 12, and only 2 had been reported. When I could say, here's 10, and sharing that anonymously without identifying information, it was then a conversation we could have with that superintendent to say, people aren't reporting. How are you educating people on the reporting mechanism? And then can we come in and maybe bring our No Place for Hate program in? Can you work and bring in another program like Echoes and Reflection, which does Holocaust education, so that your student body can be educated? Because yes, you may only have 2 incidents reported, and let's be clear, 1 incident is one too many. But when you say things like only 2, you've really had 13. And so reporting it to us allows us to bring that aggregate data, and data sometimes moves that needle to get the administration to move, because ultimately they have Title VI obligations they have to meet. And that's the sort of final resort if a school's really not approaching it, is to help educate people on their Title VI rights.
Jason, what has been the response from parents about the information you have provided?
So far we only had 2 sessions, with the second one occurring last night, but the feedback that I have received until now has been very positive. It's clear that parents greatly appreciate that we're offering these programs and resources, as there's greater awareness in our community that anti-Semitism is rising, and that many of the anti-Semitic incidents that we've seen have taken place inside of schools. I would say, aside from the program itself, though, many parents have expressed great appreciation for assistance that we have provided them in the past year. And recently, Andrew and I both heard from a parent who we worked with last year after being contacted about vicious anti-Semitism that their child had experienced in a high school, actually in a town where swastikas were being drawn on signs throughout the town on basically a daily basis, overnight, every day. And the parent told us that at the beginning of the school year, she had recently met with the school superintendent and other school officials to discuss concerns about anti-Semitism in the school. And she said that during the meeting, the officials actually presented her with a comprehensive professional development plan that they had worked on over the summer, which prioritized addressing anti-Semitism and including Holocaust education in the school curriculum. She let us know also that the school had partnered with Echoes and Reflections, the program that Andrew mentioned, to provide training to various groups within the school district, including staff and others, and that they'll be teaching those specific workshops to U.S. history and 8th grade teachers. And if you're not aware of Echoes and Reflections, they work with ADL, they work with the USC Shoah Foundation, and they work with Yad Vashem to put together the program. So she was very pleased about that. And I think that she felt very heard by us, and that the resources that we provided her and connections that we helped her make really help to move the needle.
Right.
What maybe has surprised you? And Andrew, you can answer this first, meaning, you know, all this work and you thought you knew all the things that could happen, but are there some examples that you've learned recently of where you see that more work has to be done in areas that you really were on the periphery and you hadn't realized how important they were until now?
Yeah, it's one, unfortunately, I'm not surprised these days by almost anything that I see. Unfortunately, we see things come along, and I've actually had people say to me, how do you do this line of work when you when you see these horrific things, and candidly, before taking this role, didn't see all that was happening. And my response to that is, there's a blessing in this job in that, yes, I see all of those things. However, I also then see everybody who comes out after a negative incident and wants to help and wants to do something positive. And I can promise you that the people who want to correct the issues and challenge and remove the anti-Semitism and hate far outnumber those people who proliferate it. And so, that's part of the blessing. Now, as far as things we've seen, as we said, we saw a big uptick in K through 12 schools with students saying Kanye was right, and that happening. We see a lot of, on both ends, we see students being harassed from a Heil Hitler salute to white supremacist propaganda and using anti-Semitic tropes. We also see where students are being ostracized in school because they do support the existence of Israel. And we see that end of things as well. So nothing's really surprising. I think the surprising piece is how high those numbers have become. We are seeing such an increase. And then the surprising piece is despite the increase in numbers and what I perceive to be an increase in reporting, I can also tell you it's still grossly underreported. Whenever I end up in a conversation with somebody and they learn that I'm the regional director for ADL Philadelphia, I hear a story about how someone experienced anti-Semitism at some point and they never reported it to anybody. And so if I can get no other message across, it's please talk with someone, whether it's ADL, whether it's your school administration, and something for as little as, and it's not little, as little as, yeah, I'm going to Jew you down, which is often a term used when somebody's trying to haggle and referring to stereotypes of Jews being cheap and frugal with money. And I've heard many a Jewish person say, I'm not going to worry about it. But there's an underlying issue that's coming there, and there's a lack of knowledge that's coming, and especially in the school setting. And it doesn't mean we have to take punitive action against the student that did it. But if we tell the schools can then take that information and know that they have to do some more education, that they have to do some more teaching to combat that piece. So that's the piece. Of nothing else, I'll emphasize it one more time. Please report to someone. Let someone know so that they can be addressing it.
Jason, do you also have anything to add? And then we're going to give you last thoughts.
I would just say, I've spent my entire professional career in the Jewish nonprofit space doing a lot of Israel advocacy, Israel education, and fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And as Andrew said, the uptick that we've seen, especially over the past year in these incidents, it's horrific. And, I've been engaged in this for a long time, but it seems like now more than ever, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are through the roof. And it's horrible to see, and it's disappointing to see. But the one thing that really does keep me going is, as Andrew mentioned, there are many people who stand against anti-Semitism, and some of the efforts that we make with different faith groups, with other different ethnic groups, the support that we get when a major anti-Semitic incident happens, it keeps me going. And to know that we have support and we have others who want to stand shoulder to shoulder with us to fight hate and to fight anti-Semitism, that's to me what keeps me motivated and really keeps me going. And we know anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish issue. It can't be a Jewish issue. It's an issue that affects everyone. And the same people who hate Jews and want to attack Jews are often the same people who want to attack other minority groups. And so it's really important that we're out there proactively building alliances with other groups, and educating people and listening to other people at the same time and helping to understand their struggles, and that we're fighting together to take down this major uptick in hate that our country is currently seeing.
And if I could leave with just this thought too, I'll share with you what I actually just shared with my board going into the Jewish New Year. The ending of this last year, we saw the very first White House plan to combat anti-Semitism. In addition, ADL, as well as many others, participated in the 60th March on Washington, which was the 60th anniversary of Martin Luther King's speech. And so what we see between that plan and this, that the issue of fighting hate in all its forms is being heard at the highest levels of our country, and people realize it's a problem and we need to do something about it. The second thing is, behind the memes, the hatred, the anti-Semitism, the statistics of all these incidents, there's an ADL office, or there's a JCRC office in Jason's case, working behind the scenes to help support each of those individuals in those cases. And we've all been able to support folks, and they've had other people around them to support them when things do happen. And I think those are two things that give me a lot of hope moving forward.
I have another question about that. Phyllis, we have time for that?
Yeah, one quick question.
Okay. I don't know whether Andrew or Jason, whether to ask Andrew or Jason. So whoever wants to reply, please do. One of the, it's my impression that one of the main sources for anti-Semitism towards students is the fact that anti-Semitism and the human rights of Jews and the rights of Jews to safety are not included in the, let's say, the intersectional alliance that is fighting for equity for many minorities, but not for the Jewish one. For all kinds of reasons, they didn't include Jews in that, or as a theme. Is that? Do you think that the strategy that the White House made recently in collaboration with the Jewish organizations and other organizations, do you think that will change?
Jason, do you want to take it first?
You know, I would just say, regardless of the White House's strategy, and you know, we could both get into that, but regardless of that, this is a long-standing problem that in intersectionality and in DEI spaces, Jews are often left out of those conversations. And it's often, you know, sometimes it is purposeful, and you have people that are leading those efforts who are anti-Semitic themselves. But quite often it's also that people are just ignorant and not educated enough on the Jewish community. And there's this perception that all Jews are Ashkenazi white people, and that they're all bankers and rich and, you know, privileged. And, you know, that's just not the truth. So, you know, we see that with more education on anti-Semitism, with more education on who the Jewish people are, on our history, that can often change. But you need people to have a willing and open mind, and to be able to listen, because, you know, we have to dispel that narrative, because it's just not a true narrative. And we know, you know, especially if you go to Israel, you see the diversity, the vast diversity of the Jewish community. And even here in Philadelphia, our community survey that was done in 2019 estimated that 10% of Jews in the Philadelphia area identify as Jews of color. There are many Black and brown Jews here in Philadelphia. We are not all just white Ashkenazi. So I do think it, again, comes down to a lack of education and a need to show people the diversity of the Jewish community and to help people understand Jewish history, because we have a long history of being hated and expelled and chased out of different countries. And there's a reason, you know, there's a reason why many Jews are good with finances and many Jews are good at banking.
Exactly.
And it all stems back to anti-Semitism, unfortunately.
And I'll just add here, we mentioned this earlier, one of the things we are advocating for is the inclusion of Jewish culture and anti-Semitism in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We've seen for a variety of reasons where it's been left out. Some of it's intentional, some of it's not. Some of it's just lack of knowledge and not knowing. I prefer to go into those conversations believing in the best of intentions. And so trying to advocate for that. And we have seen an increase of that and desire for that. The number of businesses that have reached out to us asking us to come in and educate and include us in their diversity, equity, and inclusion work. The number of schools that have brought us in to address anti-Semitism. But I'd also remind, at least from the ADL end, we're a 100-year-old organization with the mission to fight the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all, because our founders knew then what we know now. You can't fight one form of hate and bigotry without fighting all forms. And, I'd always be careful in generalizing. There are anti-Semitic people of color as there are racist Jewish people. This exists, and we have to fight hate in all forms, regardless.
Exactly. And as I wrap up, I just want to add one thing from my personal point of view that I've been working on in projects, that we Jews individually have to take every opportunity we can in a very nice, non-confrontive way to educate people. So we need to be prepared to say exactly about, so whenever I can in something I'm writing, if I can work in that there are poor Jews and that Jewish organizations support them, knowing that the trope is that Jews have money. And I also try and work in about Sephardim, etc. We individually need to think about opportunities on our own where we can educate with a half a sentence. So that's my challenge for today. For everyone who's listened, think about in your everyday conversations when you can actually educate with just one sentence or two. And with that, I thank you really, Andrew and Jason, so much for this enlightening conversation. I thank our listeners. For those of you who'd like to know more about Evelyn, me, and our her Never Again Is Now documentary, you can go to our Never Again Is Now podcast channel on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we end every podcast, we say, please, without putting yourself in physical harm, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.
Amen. Thank you.